Hey everybody, thanks for clicking on this video, and I hope this video finds everybody doing well and in good spirits. And I'm going to do a series of videos, hopefully a series, on beadwork. One of my subscribers, after I had showed that brain tan pouch that I had dyed with black walnut and beaded it, a subscriber got a hold of me and thought that it would be good for me to do a few videos on beadwork. And I've been giving it some thought for the past couple of weeks, and I thought, yeah, what the heck. I recognize it may not generate a lot of views, and if you're the type of person that, would find something like this boring, go on to the next video. It's not going to offend me because I realize this type of artwork is not for everybody. But for those that are interested, let me just share with you some of the things that I've come to learn over the years regarding beadwork. Okay, so this is kind of like maybe a little introduction into getting started in beadwork. What got me started with it years ago, I had made myself a brain tan double pouch shooting bag. And another friend of mine, not a buckskinner or anything like that, he had learned younger in life how to do beadwork. So he got the measurement of what the outside flap was, and he ended up beading a pattern that would fit the outside flap of that pouch. And it was actually great, but there was a problem with it. And I'll explain that in just a little bit because I have an example piece to show you here. But that's what got me started in beadwork, because I recognized how beautiful beadwork can actually be, especially when it's on, like your shooting bag, your buckskin shirt, or your, a frock or something like that. So you got to start by getting a couple of really good books that gives you the basic. And one of the first books that I purchased was this right here, American Indian Beadwork. Okay, now what's good about this is it tells you how to make a loom, different styles of beadwork, but more importantly, for me at least, in the back several pages, they have a lot of photographs of Native American beadwork with, rosettes in this particular case. And as I flip through the pages, armbands. I like to do stuff like this on powder horn straps. I've done belts using some of these patterns. And, you can mix and match any one of these patterns and come up with your own idea, which really should speak to you as an individual. And I'll kind of show that here just a little bit, why there's certain things that I do that actually, as a beader and recognizing that it's going to be my personal piece, there's a few things that I always elect to do for myself. Well, maybe not always, but more often than not. Here's just some more examples of some beadwork that's in this book. And like I said, it does show you how to set up a loom, different types of beading, how to bead through leather, through the edges of leather. Here's just a little example, I'll talk about it a little bit, beadwork being done on a loom. Okay. Now, here's another example of looms. Okay. Now, another resource that's really good, goes into a little more in depth, is beading in the Native American tradition. And you can see on the back, it's got some very good beaded moccasins on the front, beaded pouch, and once again on the inside, depending on what type of beading you're going to do, whether straight stitch, brick stitch, or something like that, there's multiple patterns in a book such as this. Okay, And there again, in the introduction, I got to tell you, the guy that put this book together is really highlighting his own work, which is what I would do also. That's why I do a lot of beadwork. In my buckskinning clothing I wear, people can say, wow, I really like that beadwork. Where'd you get it? Well, I did it myself. So in a sense, I really become that walking advertisement. And here again, this book also shows how to set up a loom and get started with loom work. Now, when you come across something like this that's got a lot of patterns, how do you do your patterns? Well, you can go online and you can do an engine search for, this one is, this is from Missouri River. That's just the booklet or the book that I got this from originally. But you look at the title and you can go online and type in number 11 loom graph paper. Now the number 11 refers to the size of the bead. And the beads come in like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The higher the number, the smaller the bead. A lot of guys like working with number 10 beads because the bead's a little bit bigger than 11s, but you got to be cautious because sometimes when you buy beads that the package says number 10 seed beads, you might be getting 11s, and in particular when you're dealing with red. For some reason across the industry, red is a very difficult color to deal with because lot dies change, and sometimes when, like in my case, I use number 11 beads. So in my case, when I order number 11 beads, I might, just say for instance, I order 5 packages. 3 of the 5 packages will be number 11s, and the other 2 will be number 10s. I do mix them. That doesn't bother me a bit. I do mix them because they're just so close in size, it really doesn't make a difference. But when you get your graph paper, you can draw out and count the beads that you want to be using in whatever pattern you desire to make. Now, when you do this, do odd numbers because you need a center to your pattern. So I guess there's really no other way to do that other than maybe looking at this pattern again right here. You can see that there's a very distinct middle. So when you graph out your work, bear in mind you want to work with odd numbers so that when you have a center and then you get the even amount of numbers in your work. For instance, I'm working on one right now, this pattern right here, and even as wide as it is, it's still graphed out in a odd number. There's a very distinct center, and you can see that just right in here. So you want to bear that in mind when you're graphing out your designs. Now, one of the reasons why I got away from working on a loom, because when it comes to the loom, you've got multiple strings. You have to string from one end to the other end of the loom. And you also have to pretty much know how long your intended pattern is to be. So if you want, like if you're going to make a belt and you need like 45 inches, then your loom needs to be a lot big, well not a lot, but bigger than that. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like working on a loom, because you need a longer loom for your longer intended item. And the other problem that I discovered right off with the loom is that unless you get those strings strung at the same tension from end to end, for instance, for me, when I first started stringing a loom, I would go too tight. And when I got my piece off of the loom, the beads would kind of bunch, and the pattern didn't look nice and neat and flat like this one does. Now this is all done obviously off the loom, and I'll show that perhaps in another video. But for right now, I just want to talk about the loom, and for me, it's not really a positive way of doing beadwork. So that was the first thing that I experienced with doing beadwork on a loom. If you string it too tight and you start taking your work off the loom, it's going to bunch up. The other problem with the loom is because you have all these strings going back and forth, you have your main string and you have to count your beads on the string that you plan on using with the needle to go through the beads. Now when you get to that point and you're ready to put your beads on the string that's been gone back and forth on the loom, you have to push the bead up, okay, so that the bead is actually coming up between each string. At that point, you have to make sure that your needle goes through the top of the bead. Because if it doesn't, when you get to the other side and you lower your hand, then you've got one or two beads hanging down, and there's nothing holding that bead to the top side of the string. That's very cumbersome, especially if you're doing, you know, a strip that wide and you might have 50 beads, and you go through everything and then you realize, oh crap, I missed the first two beads. You got to take the whole thing apart, you know, and then start over, and then hopefully you can get every bead, that needle through every single bead. And believe me, when it comes to number 11 seed beads, the hole in the center is pretty darn small. So if you manage to get your work done on the loom, the other issue that you're going to face is, how do I get it off the loom without losing the beads? Because the thing about doing beadwork on a loom, if you break one string, you will lose multiple beads. Okay? And I'll show that here again in just a little bit. And if you hear a little bit of like a wind blowing, my furnace just turned on. In fact, I think what I'll do is just pause it right here and wait till it stops. All right, where was I? Yes, talking about doing beadwork on a loom, some of the issues. The other issue you have is getting your work off of the loom and being able to secure the ends. Now in this little piece right here, this is the only piece of loom work I have left. But what you have to do is cut long strings off of the loom and then take 3 and then braid them all tight. And the other thing is depending on what you want to apply this to, when you go to sew it down, you have to take and move the pull the strings to the back side as you're stitching this to whatever you want to apply it to. So there's a lot more involved with doing loom work, and like I said before, if you break a string, you lose beads. So I learned early on not to do my work on a loom, and I had a lot of help from an old buckskinner friend of mine, Sam, that was kind of like making a little bit of fun of me because I would take some of my loom work to Mountain Man Rendezvous and, you know, do the loom work while I'm sitting, you know, in my lodge watching over my trade table. So he asked me if I'd like to learn how to do beadwork off of the loom. And I said, certainly, because one of the advantages to doing your beadwork off of the loom, such as this, obviously you don't have to have the loom taking up all that space. You can just fold your work up and put it in a little bag, and that's all the room that that's going to take up. So there's a lot of advantages to doing your beadwork off of a loom. And in the next video, I'll show you how to get started in doing your beadwork off of the loom. Now, what I want to do is, since I showed one of the issues with the loom beadwork in breaking a string and losing beads, I have an example here on my buckskin shirt, and I just now discovered this. Here's my shirt, and as you can see, I've got shoulder stripes, shoulder pieces of beadwork coming over the shoulder. On the back of it, I have this long strip on the back. Okay, now I don't know if the camera's really going to pick it up or not, but right here, let me see if I can get close and let it focus. Right here, I have a broken string, but you can still see the beads are on the string. So when I get done here, I'll take some needle and thread, beading thread, and I'll restitch it, and it's back to new again. In fact, looking at it closer, I have another spot on here that has a broken string. I didn't lose the beads because of the way the beadwork is done off of the loom. You actually have to break the string above the bead and below the bead before you actually lose the bead, and that very rarely happens. Another example is I've got a knife sheath here. Camera's probably not going to pick it up, but if you look real close right here, I've got a broken string. The beads are still there. It's another reason and advantageous to do your beadwork off of the loom. And just as a side note, this particular neck knife, I actually forged the blade from a ball bearing. Just a little diversion. Just to show you a little bit more of the work that I've done over the years as it pertains to me and some of the things that I like about beadwork as decoration. Here's a wool shirt, blanket shirt I made years ago, and obviously I learned how to do rosettes at the time, so I have a turtle, the bottom of shoulder strips that go up and around the shoulder. Now, since I wear this shirt a lot, these beads get abused, and 2-3 times a year I actually have to go through and just kind of like restitch the edges. And there again, that's one of the reasons why I like beading off of the loom, because when you break a string, you don't lose your bead, so you can just go back through and restitch it and everything's hunky-dory. Okay. Years ago, I did this very, very long belt off of the loom. I don't wear this anymore because I now have gone to a 3-inch wide belt, but on occasion I might pull it down and wear it. It's a nice beaded piece of work with a bone buckle. Okay. Another piece that I did, and you may have recognized it maybe in a couple of the videos that I've done at Mountain Man Rendezvous, but my belt bag. And at this point I want to point to the beadwork right here of the two birds. Call them hawks, call them a phoenix, but it's a bird. And again, I like doing rosettes too. I don't do a lot of rosettes, but I do some. But there again, if I happen to leave this laying around because of the beadwork, anybody can readily recognize that it belongs to me. Okay. Here's my fire starting kit I made years ago out of brain tan. Here again, there's the two birds and another beaded patchwork right here. Teach you how to do edge beading and some beading on the back of it. And I keep all my fire starting stuff in this particular pouch. A pouch that I made recently, I kind of changed it up just a little bit. Commercial tanned buffalo, and instead of the two birds I put the two roses instead. And then more recently, out of the walnut dyed deer hide I just did, I went back through and I made myself another bag to wear on my belt. And here again, here's the beading and there's the bird. So that kind of identifies maybe some of the work as being mine, but that's how I choose to decorate a lot of the stuff that I wear into a buckskinner's camp or a trek or something like that. Well, as a matter of fact, the intended purpose for this pouch is that if I ever do a trek, I have a fire starting kit in here. Because if I go on a trek, I'm sure as heck not going to carry this big bulky fire starting pouch. So everything that I would need to start 1 or 2 fires is actually contained in this pouch. So anyhow, I think that's all I have to say about that on this subject at this point in time. I think in the next video I'll show everybody how to get started off of the loom, and I would recommend, if you're going to do this, get a really good pair of reading glasses that have a good magnifying lens on them because these beads, these number 11 seed beads, in a lot of people's opinion are small. And just to add to something I had said earlier, I like using number 11 seed beads just simply because the smaller the bead, the more intricate you can get with your pattern. And the other thing that I might want to add right here too, if you go with this graph paper for number 11, bear in mind that as you graph out your pattern or your real life work, your beads will actually be maybe 3 to 4 rows wider than this. So if you are tending a pattern to be exactly this size on this graph, that's not going to happen. It'll actually be just a little bit wider. So bear that in mind if you're going to back, some beadwork up like this on a very determined size of cloth. These patterns will come out a little bit bigger when you actually do the bead work. So anyhow, thanks for watching, and in the next video I'll show the whole technique of getting started and beading off of the loom, and I've already explained the advantageousness of it. Is you break a string, you don't lose beads, and you don't have to carry a big loom around with you. You can just take your work and put it in a small bag and carry it. So we'll catch you next time around. Excuse me. Before I say goodbye completely, I just happened to shut off the camera and looked out my bedroom window. Lo and behold, they're here for their morning snack.